Hey guys, I'm Kristen from College Lead. I help students with planning high school courses and extracurriculars and also guide them through the college application process. I know many students now have to do school from home, so I wanted to offer some tips and strategies for how you can study in a smart way in a different environment. By smart studying, I mean getting as much productivity and efficiency as you can as you work. So that means maybe you can get 3 hours of work done in an hour and a half just by incorporating and using the right strategies. As always with my videos, I like to say that every student is different, so spend time doing your own research and figure out what's best for you. And in general, this video is for anyone looking to develop or learn a new skill. You might notice that I'm trying something new. I will be here in this corner, and I'm hoping that this will make my videos a little bit more interactive and fun. So yeah, with that, let's get started. So I have grouped the types of learning that we need to do in school into 3 different groups. The first being memorization, the second one, anything that involves practice problems, and the third one, anything that's writing based. So let's start with memorization. I will be typing as I talk, so please excuse any spelling errors. I'm still struggling to type and talk at the same time. So memorization. Okay, cool. No misspellings yet. The first point to remember is that consistency is more important than the number of hours you actually spend studying. For example, let's say I am giving you 50 vocabulary words to memorize, and we have student A who tries memorizing them by doing flashcards on them for 15 minutes a day. And then we have student B who crams them all at once on the very last day of the week. Who will be more likely to score higher on the test and be less stressed in the process? Obviously student A, so remember, consistency is important. The total number of hours may still end up being the same, but having that repeated pattern of reviewing the vocab words every day really helps to solidify memory. You can think of memorization, memorization like painting. The more layers you add on, the stronger and easier it is for you to recall whatever is in your mind. Along the same lines, this is for regardless of what kind of subject you're studying or what kind of method you are using to study, but habit trumps motivation. And I say that because motivation does not last. Motivation is temporary. A classic example is going to the gym. Come New Year's time, everyone will make that resolution to lose weight. So the gyms are extremely packed the first few months of the year, but then afterwards, the attendance gradually plummets and decreases. That right there, that little bump that you see in gym attendance in January and February, that's motivation. The people who you see stay and consistently go to the gym every single week throughout the entire year, and not just New Year's, are displaying something called habit. Habit is something I want you to build into your study and practice schedule. This is something that is going to be very important because motivation to study will not always be there. But if you establish that habit, it will become automatic in your brain to say, oh, I haven't done those 15 minutes of flashcards yet. Let me just do them now. And in the long run, this will really help you develop discipline and some practices that will lead you to success in the future. Okay, then the last key point I have is there is a huge value of delayed gratification. And by this, I mean that the more time you work towards something and the more work you put into achieving a goal, the better the benefits you will get from that goal. College is a classic example. As a high schooler, you probably won't be able to get to college until 3 or 4 years from now, and you won't be able to reap the benefits of college until 10 years from now, let's say. The idea of going to college is to obviously make friends, but one of the primary ones is to join the workforce. You can have a competitive salary. You probably won't reap the benefits of that competitive salary until you are in your, let's say, mid to late 20s or even early 30s. But as high schoolers, you're working very hard now to get to that level. So you can see that same idea of delayed gratification applies to your study. AP exams happen only once a year, but if you build up that study habit earlier on, then the reward you'll get at the end will be much greater. And it'll also involve less stress than if you crammed in all the materials right before the AP exam. I'm not saying that cramming is impossible, and sometimes you have to do it if you're really crunched on time or if you're really stretched thin for time, but it's not the best or healthiest way to study. Okay, so now to the meat of the video. Here are some tactics that I found for me that don't work. again, going back to my main point, every student is different. Spend your time doing your own research and figure out what works for you. What I want to show is there is this process of experimentation involved. I tried many different study tactics. Some worked and some didn't. But the important thing is that I want you to try different methods. So here, I would say what doesn't work for me would be highlighting textbooks and reading over and over again. And the other one I would is typing notes, actually, typing or writing notes. So I found this isn't effective at all for me for memorization. Highlighting textbooks, for instance, when I see a key term or when I annotate a book, I sometimes never go back to the textbook. Or even if I reread it, that doesn't guarantee that I'll actually absorb the information. I found that even if I read that book once every day for a week, I don't absorb it as well as I would if I used a different method. So this is just something for me. I am more of a I would say structured learner, where I need to have, this is the term and this is the definition. And so what I found works for me is flashcards. Flashcards are amazing. I was a religious Quizlet user and I am a huge fan of them. Highly recommend checking them out. I'll leave a link in the description to that. But flashcards were amazing for me. I used them for bio, I used them for vocab words, for languages I studied, history exams, literature terms, etc. And you might be wondering, why did I use flashcards for literature and history? History, okay, for events, and then also for key figures. When you write the FRQs for AP English literature, you have to draw upon evidence from the books you've read throughout. And for me, it just was too general and jumbled up in my head for me to keep track of, oh, Hamlet is really good for themes of betrayal and themes of this or themes of X, Y, and Z. And then Kill a Mockingbird is good for this and that. What really helped me was I would actually turn the term, like, equal to the term being To Kill a Mockingbird, and on the back of it I would write different examples of how I could use this book in an essay with specific examples of specific scenes or even quotes that I could memorize. And having this sort of structured thought really helped me to absorb that information. So I learned that I am much more of a structured thinker. Even in all of my YouTube videos, you see that the notes I take are in bullet point form. This is the way of how I found is the most effective for me to study or even communicate sometimes. Another really good tip is you can turn whatever terms you've highlighted in your textbooks to flashcards. The term would be the key word that you highlighted, and then the definition would just be the rest of the sentence on the back. So that's a really good tip, and you can make your own flashcards in Quizlet as well. I would say for flashcards, a really good method is have a separate pile. One pile for the words or terms that you are already very familiar with, and another pile for the terms that you are less familiar with. And make sure to do extra repetitions with the pile you're less familiar with. And that way you will be able to minimize the amount of time needed to study because you won't need to go through the ones you already know, and also have a really good way to structure and sort these different terms into boxes in your mind. Another tip I have is memory tricks or mnemonics. I highly recommend using this method. It is ridiculously effective. I think a great example is, let's say you are studying Japanese and you're trying to memorize the hiragana ku. This is a really good visual example. Your memory tricks can even be as silly as something like this. Okay, this character right here looks similar to a bird or a cuckoo bird. So anytime I see this, I'll think of the bird and automatically know, oh, this is ku. Over time, as you review the vocabulary, you won't need this sort of aid, but this is a really good way to kick off memorization. And I found that after developing this trick for different words that I had to memorize, using this method helped me to memorize things very quickly over the course of just 24 hours or even 48 hours. So I highly recommend trying this method out. And you can make your own mnemonics as long as it makes sense in your mind and you remember what it is. Okay, so now I've migrated to the bottom of the screen, so hopefully we can view this. But the next section I want to cover are practice problems. So the points that I'd like you to remember are the same as I mentioned for memorization, where consistency is more important than the number of hours you actually put in, habit over motivation, and also don't forget the value of delayed gratification. You won't get the sort of reward or goal you're working towards at the end of the day, but maybe at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you will. So keep that in mind. There is light at the end of the tunnel. A few things you should never do with practice problems. Don't do problems that test concepts that you're familiar with. A super basic example. Let's say you're learning multiplication and division. You're really good at multiplication, so you only do a few problems of those every day, whereas you focus the bulk of your time on division. It makes no sense to continue practicing multiplication. So make sure you can sort out different practice problems by the concepts they test and focus on those the most. The other part you must never do when you're doing practice problems is you should never fail to understand why you got a problem incorrect. Figure out why you got that problem incorrect and what you can do next time to avoid it. This will allow you to maximize your learning from each practice problem. Understand the process of how to solve a problem. A really good example is, let's say you are in chemistry and you're given two different volumes and a temperature. The first step would always be convert those metrics into degrees Celsius or from inches to, or from yards to feet, or to whatever metrics make the most sense for the question you're dealing with at hand. And then the next step is to do X, Y, and Z. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you can approach a problem, so then once you see that similar problem, you know exactly what to do with it. The next one is you should learn to recognize different patterns. This is especially important for the SAT. And I actually have a few recommendations for SAT prep books that show you what are the different patterns in the test and how to take advantage of that. So I will leave a link in the description below where you can access those books. The next one is when you do practice problems, let's say you're preparing for an exam, do it under a timed environment. I want you to practice under a timed environment if preparing for a test in order to simulate that same amount of pressure you're going to feel, because stress has an impact on how clearly we are able to think. And I want you to simulate that environment so when it comes to test day, you won't be surprised at the amount of stress you're feeling and you'll be able to handle the situation well. The last point is quite obvious, but is always something that we should keep in mind. I want you to make sure you do enough practice problems. This kind of feeds into the idea of recognizing different patterns and understanding the process of how to solve a particular problem. Only if you do enough practice problems will you be able to recognize those patterns in the first place, so don't forget that. The last section I want to cover is on essay writing. So here, a few things to keep in mind. Always plan early. You never want to say, oh, I have an essay due tomorrow, let me just get it done tonight. That is not the situation you want to be in. Yes, at some point you may be able to get by with a B or an A, but in the long term you won't be able to develop those writing skills that will help you in the future. So two things to remember about essay writing. The first one is you always want to plan early. Never put yourself in the situation where you have an essay due tomorrow and you're just starting to write it now. I guarantee the quality will not be as good compared to if you had planned ahead and gave yourself enough time to put thought and effort into your essay. So similarly, make sure you spread out your work into manageable bites. In high school, I had to write a 10-page senior paper and it was due 6 months from the time that it was assigned. It was difficult to keep in mind, oh shoot, I have a 10-page paper due in 6 months, but if you break down exactly, okay, I have 6 months, so I should try to write at least a page and a half. I should try to write at least a page and a half every month, and by week, that turns out to X, Y, and Z, and then that'll give me enough time to outline and revise. So see if you can plan out what is the goal or to-do or assignment you have internally for yourself month by month, week by week, and in that way you can make sure that you're not cramming in such a huge paper at the very last moment. One thing to definitely do when you're writing, always outline. Even if you're writing a free response for the AP exam, bullet point the different pieces of evidence you'll use, because once you start writing, sometimes you'll be so absorbed in writing that sentence that you're on that you will forget some of the supporting points that you initially came up with. So always write a note on the side to remember and reference. And that'll reduce the stress and also help you to remember what content you wanted to write about. I have a great example of how to start outlining the college application essays, so feel free to check that out in this video here. I will leave a link below in the description. So that concludes my video on smart study tips at home. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I also offer one-on-one sessions with high school students to help them get through the college application process, and also plan out extracurriculars and courses in high school. So if you're interested in meeting with me one-on-one, just fill out the contact form at mycollegelead.com. Thank you for watching!